Hi, I'm Nicola Davies and I write books for children. I've kind of lost count of how many it is now. It's somewhere between 60 and 80. And I write picture books, I write poems, I write fiction. At the moment, I'm writing something really long, the longest thing I've written for about 15 years. I think I'm up to about 80,000 words now. Anyway, I'm going to start by talking to you about reading, about how I started reading. And the truth is, I didn't learn how to read until I was very nearly 7. I can remember sitting in class in school. I went to a funny little primary school that was just around the corner from where my parents lived, outside Birmingham. And it was called Oteley Hill School. And it was run by an absolutely terrifying Austrian lady who wore her hair back in an iron-coloured bun and hit people over the knuckles with an iron ruler. She was terrifying. Anyway, in that school, I can remember sitting in class and looking at the blackboard and seeing what I now know are letters of the alphabet written up there, and the teacher trying to teach us these letters of the alphabet and what they meant. And I can remember looking at them and thinking, well, that's really boring. Why would I want to know about that? I want to be outside running about, you know, in the trees and the green and poking worms and lifting up rocks and looking for insects. I wasn't the least bit interested in reading. And I didn't really get it. And all the books that we had in school, all the ones that you had to learn to read with, were a kind of Janet and John things, you know. I see the ball. Janet sees the ball. What's interesting about that? And that made me even less keen to read. And then I'm not quite sure what happened. But I think because we had a lot of books at home and my parents were big readers. I don't come from a posh family. My dad was the first child in his family to stay on at school and to go to university. I come from a long line of miners and steel workers from South Wales. But my parents were both very keen readers, very keen on poetry and music and all of that. So I had that surrounding me at home. So I think somehow I made the connection between the stories that my dad read me and told me and made up, because he was quite good at making up daft stories, and this thing writing these words on the page. And once the penny dropped, then I was away. I was kind of, and I've actually got a book here that was one of my very, very first books. Now, I don't think there were very many picture books about animals when I was a little kid. And this is a book that my dad bought for me. And you can see how young I was when I got it, because that's what I did on the first page. And it's not because I didn't like it, but because I thought it was really, really exciting. And I was so excited. And actually, I saw that happen with my own children. The books that they found the most exciting were the ones that they were most likely to scribble in. But you can see it's not. In fact, I found wolves very exciting. I've scribbled all over that wolf as well. But you can see it's not like, you know, modern photographic books today. All the photographs are black and white. And the text is, you know, it's not exactly written for little kids. But this was one of my very, very first books. And I can remember so clearly sitting in bed and turning the pages of this book and being completely fascinated by it. And fascinated by the information that it gave me. So reading was a big part. Stories, exploring the world through reading, finding out about the world through reading. I loved atlases and maps. The present that I got for my 12th birthday was the Reader's Digest Atlas of the World. Oh. And I'm closing my eyes now to remember the utter delight of turning those pages and thinking, this is the earth. This is where I live. And I can go and explore all this stuff. It's there. It's out there somewhere in the world right now. And that was really, really fantastic, fantastic, fantastic for me. Every story that I write has a story that is part of my life. And I've written lots and lots of books. So it's really hard to choose which one. Well, actually, it's not so hard to choose which one. Mummies are not supposed to have favourite children. But book mummies are allowed to have favourite children. And as a book mummy, this is one of my favourites. It's called The Promise, and it's illustrated by the fantastic artist, Laura Carlin. I have been so lucky in my career because I have got to work with some really, really fantastic artists. And Laura, as well as being a fantastic artist, is also a complete and utter darling who makes me laugh like a drain. This book came about because my publisher contacted me, my editor contacted me and said, would you please write a picture book version of the story, The Man Who Planted Trees. Now, I knew the book very well. It was published in the 50s in France, in French at first, and then translated into lots of languages around the world, read by millions of people. It's a very skinny little book. It tells the story in a very direct but rather lovely way of an elderly French farmer, peasant, who decides that he's going to plant trees, acorns, sycamore seeds, all sorts of things. And he doesn't ask anybody's permission. He doesn't tell anybody about it. He just gets on and does it. And he plants and he plants and he plants. And through the course of the story, what you see is the dry, deserted, denuded landscape around him being transformed through all these little trees coming up. And by the end of the book, sort of over the course of 30, maybe 40 years, this whole region of France is transformed into this beautiful, vibrant, forested area with streams and rivers and rainfall and people living in the forest. And nobody really knows how this has happened because this man's just gone on and done it. And it's a very beautiful message. And of course, it has a very strong environmental message because, as I'm sure you know, forests do have this ability to transform landscapes, to bring back rain, to bring back biodiversity, to bring back animals and plants, and also to transform human life, to provide water for our crops to grow and trees for us to use for all sorts of things. So that was a really, really powerful story. But the snag was I didn't want to steal somebody else's story. That to retell someone's story really felt to me like stealing. So I said, well, I won't rewrite you that story, but I'll write you a story that does the same job or a similar job, that tells a story about tree planting and about transformation. Now, I had at that time just written a book about climate change, and so all the stuff about climate change was in my head, about the importance of trees, locking up carbon dioxide, but also about trees, the importance of trees in cities, where they have the ability to give us clean air, to cool cities, so we don't need so much air conditioning where it's hot, and they have that incredibly important role of reminding us about nature and how important it is and how it holds us all up, and also making us happier. People's sense of well-being, their mental health, their ability to heal and recover from diseases, including COVID, is enhanced by contact with nature, by trees. If you have come out of hospital and, you've had someone cut a great big hole in your tummy or something and it's all stitched up and you're feeling vile, if you have a tree outside your window, you'll get better quicker. Really, it's a fact. It's true. Scientists have measured it and everything. So I wanted to write about trees in the city, and I wanted to write about a child. I wanted the child to be the tree planter. And the other thing I wanted from this story is I wanted it to speak to children who are having a really horrible time. Because I do a lot of work with children, different parts of the world. I work in all sorts of different schools where, mums and dads have got loads of money, and schools where mums and dads haven't got two pennies to rub together, all of it. And in every single school, no matter what the school is like, there are kids who are having a horrible time. And I wanted to write a story that spoke to those children, that gave them something outside of themselves to think about, and hope for the future, hope and faith in their own ability to change their own lives. And through transforming their own lives, maybe to transform the world. So I thought about all that stuff. It was all kind of sluicing around in my head for ages. And I don't really remember that I had even the beginnings of the thread of the story of the promise. But one morning I sat down at my desk and I thought, this is it, I'm going to write it. All that stuff that's been going round in my head for weeks and weeks and weeks, it's all going to come out somehow. I don't know how it's going to turn out, but I'm going to do it now. And I sat down at my desk, and 2 hours later I had the text of the promise, and I think we changed one line after that. So I was really, really lucky that it came to me so quickly. Most of the time picture books, because they're short, because you have not very many words to play with, and that means the words have to work very hard. It's a long job, it's a hard graft writing picture books, but with the promise it just came very, very quickly. And that little girl who is at the heart of the story, who's a street child, so she lives on the street, she's got no family, she's got nobody and nothing. She is really the product of all those children I've seen over many years who are not having a happy time. And actually, I have to say, of my own childhood, which was very privileged in many ways, but not entirely happy. And so all of that went into this little character. And the wonderful thing about this book, I'm so happy to say that actually it works on the very children who I want it most to work on. So when I read it to a school or in a class, very, very often a child who is for some reason going through something horrid in their life will come up to me afterwards very quietly and say, "Thank you very much for that story." Or, "I felt that story was about me," and then share something about their lives. And that is, what greater gift could a writer possibly have than that? Always what I'm writing about really is about humans and nature, and humans and animals. And very often I do a lot of research about real things, about real animals, real people, real conservation stories. I come across real people, real stories, who I just need to rewrite a little bit to make them into characters in books. But actually, what all my characters have in common is that they all come out of a place, a real part of the natural world. So that is a real part of them, and that, for me, in my head, that's a really important part of how I create them. And this book, Walking the Bear, the main character in this book is a little boy called Zaki. And actually, he really came out of a real place and a real situation. This book is about dancing bears. Now, I don't know if you know about dancing bears. It sounds a bit weird, doesn't it? Dancing bears. But all over Europe and in the UK, up until, maybe 200 years ago, dancing bears was something that we would all have seen on the streets. But of course, it's died out in Europe. But in India, until very, very few years ago, that was still very common. I went to India. I went to a city called Bhopal, and I went to visit the community, the Calendar community, who had settled in Bhopal after giving up their bears. And I spent a long time. They were they were so lovely. They were so lovely to me and so welcoming and put up with all my daft questions. And they told me great stories about the bears they used to keep. But what gave me the character was seeing the little boys in that community running about and how they related to each other and how much their lives had changed from the way they would have been if they were still travelling around the countryside as the children of bear keepers. And so I thought, okay, so I wonder what would have happened if there had been a family where the dad had said, I am not giving up keeping bears and nobody is going to make me. And if one of the children of that family had said, well, I don't want to be a bear keeper. I don't want to be a dancing bear trainer. I want to be something else. So I wondered what would happen in that family when there was conflict between the dad and the little boy. And that's what gave me Zaki, this little boy. Here he is. And he is the child of a bear keeper. And his dad is determined that no matter what anybody says, Zaki is going to grow up to be a dancing bear trainer, the same as everybody else in their family has always been. But Zaki wants to be a flute player. That's what he wants to do. He's already very good. So the little bit of the book I'm going to share with you is from this book, Ariki and the Giant Shark. And I'm going to read a little bit at the start, the introduction, and I'm going to read you the first chapter. So it doesn't really need any explanation, but what I will do is I'll show you the map of the island where Ariki lives. So she lives on a little tiny island in the middle of the ocean, in the Pacific, in a warm part of the Pacific. You can see it's warm because there are palm trees growing and there's a reef, coral reef around it. But that's how people used to live in that part of the world, on these little tiny islands, entirely self-sufficient. They grew a little bit, they fished a little bit, and that was their world, those little islands and the huge, huge blue sea around and the sky. That was their world. So, we are used to thinking of the sea as something that you get to when the land runs out. But just suppose you lived the other way around, in a place where sea stretched from one horizon to the other, and the land was very hard to find. This is not an imaginary place. If you look at a map of the world, you can find it. That big expanse of ocean we call the Pacific. A whole world of water dotted with the smallest scraps of land. Long ago, a girl lived there on a tiny island shaped like a sea turtle. She rode on the tails of sharks. She used the stars as stepping stones. She sang songs to the storm. But most of all, she knew what it meant to live in the true colour of our planet, which is not green, but blue. Her name was Ariki, and this is one of her adventures. Chapter 1. 5 sharks circled slowly in the clear water, their shadows tracking over the white sand. Ariki's eyes worked perfectly underwater, so she could see every detail of their bodies, their crescent-shaped fins and the pale shine of their grey skins. These were yellow moon sharks. She chose the largest and dived down towards it. She had been diving like this since she could walk, and holding her breath was as natural as blinking. So it was easy to swim gently up behind it. As its tail flapped lazily in front of her, she reached out and closed her fingers around the sandpapery skin. Instantly, the shark jerked in panic. Its whole body tensed, and the slow flip-flop of the tail was transformed into a frantic wriggle. Although it was not much longer than one of Ariki's legs, it pulled her along behind it. The shark shot through the water and did 3 circuits of the lagoon at high speed before it tired. But by then, Ariki at last needed a breath. She let go of the shark and swam up to burst through the surface, laughing. She loved this game, played every year when the baby moon sharks spent their first weeks of life in the quiet and calm of the lagoon. They were too small and inexperienced to be really dangerous, but still big enough and wild enough to tow any of the island children who were brave enough to hitch a ride. In another month, they would learn to turn around and bite. But for now, the thought hadn't entered their small shark brains. Ariki trod water and considered what to do next. She should swim back to shore and get on with the chores her guardian Arohaka had left for her to do, but her fishing spear was strapped across her back. Ready, and there was just enough daylight left to catch a fish. The chores could wait. She turned from the shore and swam straight out towards the line of bright white surf that broke on the crest of the reef, over the stony grey wreckage of old coral broken in storms, and further to the edge of the lagoon. Beyond was the coral reef, the barrier that ringed Turtle Island, protecting it from the power of the open sea. The ocean swell spilled over the top of the reef as it was the lip of a submerged bowl, and poured into the still lagoon. Ariki rode the waves, letting them swoop her back and forth over the reef, the mauves and pinks and yellows of the forest of corals and their flocks of fish. It was like flying through a rainbow. She never tired of it. But now she needed to hunt. She kicked hard against the incoming waves that threatened to smash her down onto the hard spikes of coral heads, and pushed herself towards open water. For a moment she was engulfed in the chaos of breaking waves, and then, quite suddenly, the reef fell away below her, curving down, down, down into bottomless indigo. Ariki adored this place, the reef drop-off. Corals crowded at its edge. Reef fish swirled in clouds, and big groupers, sharks and barracuda, prowled in the shadowy deep, ready to snatch their smaller relatives. Most of all, she loved the sensation of soaring over that great, unknown depth. This was why her chores on land were often left undone. It was only here, alone in the blue, that Ariki felt free. Now it's the creative challenge part. Many of my books, well, all of my books really, are set in real places, real parts of the natural world. So what I'd like you to do is I want you to think of your favourite place. Your favourite place in nature. It doesn't even have to be a place that you've really been to, but that would kind of help. It doesn't have to be somewhere glamorous and far away. You can choose a tropical beach or a coral atoll or a bit of rainforest or, whatever it is you want. But you could also choose the corner of the park where you always sit to have your sandwiches, or the bit of your garden where you go and make a den. It could be anything, but it's got to be something that's in the natural world. So I want you to really think about that and think what it's like to be in that place. What do you like about it? Or if you've never been there, what you would like about it. So if it's a place you've never been, you've got to do some research. You've got to find out about it so you can really kind of imagine yourself in that place. And I want you to imagine what that place would mean to you. What is it you really love about it? What is it that really speaks to your heart there? If it's somewhere that you really know, that might be just because it's a place where you do something that you love. Or maybe it's a place that's associated with somebody you love. When I was a little girl, I absolutely loved my Auntie Ivy's garden, partly because I love my Auntie Ivy so much. And that garden and everything in it was a little world to me that was full of her laughter and her love for me when I was a kid. So it could be something like that. Or it could be something bigger. It could be a bit of a rainforest where you imagine walking around and you've got these giant trees all around you, full of birds and insects and monkeys in the top of the trees. And then I want you to imagine a threat to that place. I don't know, maybe somebody wants to come and chop the trees down. Maybe somebody wants to build a block of flats on your favourite bit of garden where you've always made a den. Or maybe somebody wants to put a road through the park where you've always had picnics on your birthday. Whatever it is, so you've got to imagine the threat. And then I want you to imagine what you would do to fight it. Who are you going to get to help you? Think really, really carefully about who might help you, who might really help you, who'd be really useful, what skills you'd need, and be really original about how you're going to fight this. So, you're not really allowed to say, okay, I've got a great big ray gun and I just killed them all. Because actually that's quite a boring story and quite short. So be creative. Think of really clever ways to get round things and to get your message over. And also, the other thing you have to think about, this is really, really important. If there is a threat to the place that you love, there has to be somebody who's threatening it. So there has to be a baddie. Now, why does your baddie want to do something horrible to the place that you love? What it is, what do they want? It's very, very important to know what it is your baddies want, because that gives you a way of fighting them. And also it means that they're real. And it might be that you find out that they're not all bad, that there's some part of them that's good. And that might help you to fight too. So, good luck, have fun, choose your place, think about it, think what it means to you, think why you like it, think what might be threatening it, who might be threatening it, why they might be threatening it, and how you are going to stop them.